The UK, fish and chips, bad tea, invading other countries,
Cricket, tradition,
the Queen,
the Tories,
poppies.
Welcome to British 24-Hour News, a channel you're still paying for and we're still broadcasting, even though you get the news on your phone now. Later today, we'll be diving into the controversial debate surrounding the question, is the world flat? Dr. Brian says no, but Mr. Styles says yes. So as a channel, we're saying maybe. But first we go to those rapscallions on the Angry Scotland podcast who have been reading through the comment sections on our social media accounts. So Chris, what have our moronic audience been saying in the replies?
We did have one reply that jumped out at us from Grant, who said, just list all the reasons why Toby Young is a cunt.
I fucking hate Toby Young. Eugenics advocate, guy that seems to constantly comment on the size of women's breasts on Twitter, who then had to delete all of those tweets when he thought he was getting some sort of government role that he ended up not getting because everybody went, hold on a minute, isn't he the guy that makes all the tweets about women's breasts and eugenics? And he's another one of these ones that's a complete fucking victim about, oh, I barely earn anything and it's so terrible and I've had all my income taken away from me because everybody objected to me just because I tweet things about women's breasts and eugenics. Why is Toby Young a thing? Why? I cannot think of a single instance where he's said anything or done anything that I've found myself in agreement with. I'm not a big fan of cancel culture because I do think it's immature and childish, but I do think that there are notable exceptions to that, and Toby Young's one of them.
Bad writers that can't hold an audience's attention tend to just have to say shocking stuff or pick such shocking subject matter to discuss in order to retain attention and so forth.
Yeah, you've also got Julia Hartley-Brewer, Alison Pearson, Andrew Neil, Brendan O'Neill. In America, you've got like Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson. They're all doing that. Say a thing that you know will cause outrage, and then ride the wave of outrage.
And they churn through this stuff. I mean, like any one of those people you talked about, you could look at any 10 of their last articles and basically be the same article. It's regurgitated again and again. It's basically just covering old ground again.
Brendan O'Neill.
King of the incels.
You only really need to read one of his articles and you've read them all, basically. All exactly the same. It's all some sort of elite is causing problems to the ordinary working man.
How do none of these people know that they are not the elite? People who've had unbelievably expensive educations, who live in houses that most people could only fucking fantasize about ever owning in London, who are all going on about the elites as if like they think that sociology professors from Milton Keynes are the elites. What are you on about? Donald Trump's thing is that, you know, I'm going to challenge the elites. You have a gold lift in your apartment with your name on it in fucking 10-foot high gold letters. What are you talking about, you orange moron?
Toby Young's a good example because he's specifically relevant in the moment with the whole COVID thing. He's been one of the worst examples of someone who's just said ridiculous and stupid things. One of his articles, the newspaper, I think it was the Telegraph, had to actually publish an apology for having published misleading information, and they retracted the whole article because it was just basically complete garbage and actually dangerous. Not just wrong, it's actually potentially causing people to do things that will spread the virus and people could potentially die from it. There are very real consequences to people lying, grifting and taking advantage of people. Just try to use these controversies to benefit themselves, to push themselves forward in their career.
Yeah, Julia Hartley-Brewer has been doing the same thing on her radio show. You know, she's just forever getting COVID deniers out. Alison Pearson keeps doing it on Twitter.
Julia Hartley-Brewer.
I think she's gammon totty.
No, that, hey. Well, go on, you brought it up.
I feel that that's a self-explanatory phrase. She's the sort of public school girly, jolly hockey sticks type, espousing hideous views. It's gammon porn.
Jesus, men, please reevaluate your life choices. Holy shit.
Gulf, where the G stands for gammon. Say what you like about the left, but at least Ash Sarkar is actually quite good looking. If If you're going to simp, at least do it for something that's worth it.
Is it Susanna Reid's Good Morning Britain?
Yes. The nation's facepalm.
You're Steve Bannon, like an actual Nazi. And Susanna's just there going, I don't really agree with this. I don't know, like, if I was in your shoes, I'd be doing more than shaking my head.
Piers Morgan is such a problematic figure in so many ways. The eons of time that could be given over to all the things that's wrong with Piers Morgan. And then during COVID, he's been stellar.
A blind squirrel finds a nut once in a while.
The worst person you know has just made a great point. If you change that picture to Piers Morgan, you're slacking off all these journalists and all that, and it's possible that we're the ones that are not normal. They probably represent what most people are like.
I think that's almost certainly true. That doesn't make them right.
I guess the question is, to what extent are these people shaping opinion, or are they just reflecting it?
I think Good Morning Britain reflects it rather than shapes it.
Pretty dark hour when you've got an actual Nazi like Steve Bannon in your show and we're just reflecting I mildly disagree with his stance on Brexit. That's a fucking twisted statement about a nation, isn't it? Is this something that we've picked up from the States? So your Fox Newses, your Sean Hannity's, Tucker Carlson's have been around doing this for years and years and years. Would I be right, and I say this as a relatively young person, that the British doing this is kind of a new thing? It's more of a modern phenomenon. We've not really experienced this, or has this always been here?
I think it's a Rupert Murdoch thing, and not all of these people currently work for Rupert Murdoch, but that infiltration of our media by Murdoch. The Times used to be a good newspaper and isn't anymore, for instance. It's a Murdochization of our media, because that shock jock radio thing has been a thing in America for decades, and it wasn't over here. But you get the likes of LBC talk radio opening up over here, and that is a relatively new thing. They gave Nigel Farage a fucking show for a while.
Gave Alex Salmond a show.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, I think. Is it almost like the crap opinion piece people that are just saying all this controversial, horrible stuff have laid the foundation for politicians then to get in on this grift and this act? The bad opinion piece writers have therefore now infiltrated politics itself.
Well, they have, haven't they? One of them's Prime Minister.
Boris Johnson and Trump. That's literally what's happened there. We've had these two guys that were more periphery commentator characters that would write and say controversial things about those in power, then find themselves in power. Is that by design by Murdoch? Is he really that much of a psycho that he's willing to let the whole world burn just to sell some newspapers?
Yes, but I mean, he is also pushing a personal political agenda, isn't he, through all of these outlets? And certainly it seems to me that he's been the undoing of the press in this country, and he's pushed over and over for regulatory reform to make it easier for people like him to hold monopolies in a way that's always dangerous. That's certainly really dangerous in America, and that's one of the problems, is that a handful of corporations are essentially running lots of local papers and local news stations and things like that. We're about to get the same here with this GB News thing, aren't we? With 2Pay TV with Andrew Neil.
I'd like to just apologise on behalf of Scotland for some of our terrible journalists that we've exported to other parts of the UK and the world, in particular Andrew Neil.
I wouldn't be surprised if GB News isn't as successful as everybody thinks it's going to be. I don't know if there's quite as much appetite for that style of news in this country as people think there is. I think there's already quite a lot of complaints about the fact that the BBC has been moving a little bit that way, and Sky News has been forced to pull itself back from being that way. Because I think actually, with the exception of a small army of the Gammonister, I think it's antithetical to the British idea of, particularly the English idea of what they're about, of their manners and things like that. And I suspect it might not be as successful as everybody thinks it is. We'll see in 2 years' time, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if it perhaps withers away. In much the same way that people starting new political parties and things like that, and there's all this fanfare and all this fuss, and then nothing really comes of it, because actually getting the market share that you need to be viable is actually really difficult, because most people are quite entrenched in their habits.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult market. I know they've had this influx of right-wing money from broad seed funding, but they'll need to make money to keep going, so I'm not sure where that's going to come from. I mean, ITV couldn't keep a news channel going. I think Sky basically just about managed it. They probably do that at a loss. The BBC One, a lot of the content from that is other programmes, and it's very repetitive. They don't have a lot of fresh new content. Possibly what it might generate into is like a clip generating machine for social media. They'll just have these things that they can then put onto Twitter. It'll just be like a TV studio where they can do interviews that they might have done in a podcast or whatever.
Do the InfoWars format where you just bring in people like Alex Jones, not specifically him necessarily, but people you can put behind a desk for an hour and just let them rant. And those folk exist on the right wing, like they're growing on trees, rather than doing cutaways to different, here's us on location here, just having that guy behind a desk. I think that might be the angle they take, because it's low production value, and as free highlights generates clips, so therefore it generates attention. But the other flip end of that discussion is the absurdity of 24-hour news existing in a post-social media age. The BBC, if you actually watch a lot of what they've developed, for example, BBC News 24, it always comes in the back of the private sector doing something. They follow, they don't lead, which is absurd, because you would think that with the licence fee, you would have all the room in the world to take risks that nobody else would be willing to take. But they don't stop and think, because Ted Turner, CNN, and correct me if I'm wrong, was the first to do 24-hour news. And Ted was viewed as being fucking insane to do this at the time. And then it worked. And then everyone else did it. But this isn't a pre-broadband internet, pre-social media age. So the question now would be like, well, in the age where we just check our phones, the place you get your news now is on your phone. Why does 24-hour news channels on a television still exist? And I don't understand why nobody at the BBC, up at the chain of command, is going, this is a completely redundant concept, why the fuck are we still doing it? And it's why I think that GB News, the assumption is it's going to be a channel that resembles News 24 or Sky. My gut feeling, they're going to use much more of the InfoWars format. Because Alex Jones, to give Jones, and I hate doing this to give him credit, Jones started off on radio. So he's the kind of guy that can just give him a microphone and go live for hours on hours and hours. And I suspect that's the kind of people that are going to try and attract to this channel. Because I say it's low production value and will generate clicks, because what the format now is that you want to get 2 minutes 15 seconds of batshittery to share to Twitter that then links you to the channel. That's what I think they'll try and do. I'm not convinced it will be a success, because even that style now feels a bit out of date. It doesn't feel like the next big thing anymore. It feels like something we'd have been interested in 2013 as opposed to now, but I think it may do better than people possibly think it might. But it would depend. It might do better online. I don't know how they're going to roll this thing out. If they've got a YouTube presence or whatever, maybe they'll be able to generate revenue that way. They'll have a rolling live stream, and maybe it'll be from the residual hits. They'll be able to get enough revenue out of that. Is Andrew Neil a gateway drug? Is he the person that leads you as your presenter of daily politics, but then you start following him on Twitter, and then suddenly you're starting to pick up a bit of the Julia Hartley-Brewer, you're starting to pick up a bit of Toby Young. Spectator magazine, that's still in business.
Get in the fucking sea, all of you. I mean, it's just like some sort of petri dish for breeding pricks. Do you harbour eugenic opinions? Come and write for The Spectator.
I think what's so shocking about Spectator magazine is the names that have been throughout the years. Boris Johnson is one, who's the current Prime Minister of the UK. You want to dismiss it as eugenicsy, racist, bigoted shite rag.
Because it is all those things. But it's the eugenicsy, bigoted shout rag of the ruling classes.
Why isn't it dunked on? that much? Is it because it's kind of underground? Fox News is like a joke. It's one of those things like if a stand-up comedian was to do like a joke on the media, they would reference Fox News because everyone in the audience would know what it was. Whereas The Spectator magazine, one of its hidden secrets is to remain slightly under the radar, almost.
I think you might be onto something there. I'm only aware of it really because of Twitter. I think you might be right in that people who are in the know what it is, for good or ill, in terms of whether or not they're for it or against it. But it isn't like the Sun newspaper. It's not like absolutely everybody knows what it is. And it could be that simple. It's appealing to a certain market. It knows exactly who it's appealing to. And it is a good incubator for a certain type of proto-fascist establishment type.
You're on that slow step to radicalisation, and I think the BBC, have quite a lot to answer for in this regard, because I even think Koonsberg's a bit like that. I'm a seemingly normal, middle-of-the-road person, but there's enough low-key shit that's punted out there that begins to make you have really stupid opinions. So her whole take on Jeremy Corbyn, as much as I felt a lot of critiques of Corbyn were valid, the whole BBC handling of that was fucking insane, and all it did was really push people much further to the right.
Doing a sort of collage picture of Corbyn wearing a hat and making it look more Russian by doing it in red and black is the equivalent of that Georgia incumbent senator making John Ossoff's nose larger in a picture, isn't it? That's propaganda. I mean, the problem with Laura Koonsberg is that she is an intelligent, capable person, but she is quintessentially an access journalist. She clearly has biases in certain directions, and they leak out very, very obviously. And she is basically getting stories directly and tweeting things on a single source from a Tory spat, and you get the situation where she's reporting that somebody's being assaulted when actually what's happened is somebody's bumped into somebody on the pavement, and it's not fucking good enough. It's certainly not good enough for the political editor of the BBC.
America sneezes, the UK gets the cold. I mean, you've seen that a bit with Murdoch's approach to press and journalism and media and the BBC itself, because certainly on their entertainment division there's an argument to be made that this definitely happens, where ITV in the early 2000s basically said, we're just going to stop doing high production value television and just do talent contests and cheap shit because it's easier to make. And then lo and behold, the BBC immediately entered into a ratings battle, and they too were like, fuck doing high quality TV, we're just going to do crap talent contests or dancing show gimmicks or whatever the fuck it is. And you do wonder as well if their press, their news wing, has also had that same issue where, oh, but Sky and the Murdoch ways to do it like this, and therefore we've slowly, residually started to resemble the thing that really we should have been rebelling against to begin with, and say like, no, like that's what those fuckers are doing, but we're going to go the high road on all of this. And they don't seem to be doing that. They seem to be going the low road, albeit in a more low-key way.
What's interesting to me is that I think it's as a result of phone hacking scandal and Sky getting their wings clipped quite a lot as a result of that. I actually now find Sky News is much better than the BBC.
I agree.
I avoided watching Sky News for years, but I reached the point where I was so scunnered with BBC News. So I started watching Sky News, and it's not that it's perfect, but it's fucking a lot better than the BBC News. I mean, I watch Channel 4 News pretty much every day for a good, solid, interesting news programme. But when there's something going on in real time, you want to be able to put our news channel on, and the BBC has very little to offer.
I think that the difference I find in watching them is that I don't have to think, Sky News, you should be doing better. Whereas if you're holding yourself up as the public service broadcaster, and also you're taking my money, this isn't like a voluntary thing where I've signed up to Sky TV or anything like that. You're literally putting letters through my door demanding cash from me. I think that you need to raise the bar, and that's the frustration I find with the BBC, particularly in their journalism, is that you should be taking the high road more than the low road. So as you say, when you have Laura Koonsberg on Twitter often just tossing stuff out there without proper verification and checking.
Yeah, to a couple of million followers, potentially.
So when Kay Burley does it, you're like, well, I mean, I'm not saying Kay Burley actually has done this, but if she were to, I'd be like, well, that's not great, but at least she's not taking my money. You know, and I think that's the contrast between the two of them, that Kay Burley is maybe not the most perfect journalist in the world, but there's less of an annoyance factor because there's not like she feels entitled to my cash. Whereas everybody that's under the BBC umbrella, you know, whether they like it or not, that's the situation. You're not surviving on your ratings and your investment from sponsors and advertisers. You're surviving based on taking money out of the public's pocket.
The tweet that you spoke about there, Tucker, the one about the punch incident, it's quite a good example of the problem, because I'm sure that got thousands and thousands of retweets, and then the subsequent apology or retraction that comes after that gets absolutely no notice whatsoever. So people can just throw these like unsourced rumours, just absolute bullshit out there, knowing that everyone will see that, but the later retraction will just get hidden.
There's an old saying that a lie gets halfway around the world while the truth's still fastening its trousers. That's exactly it. She's got millions of followers. She says somebody's punched a Tory. That gets widely reported. The truth is inevitably something much more nuanced and complex, and that's not as interesting for everybody to retweet. And everybody complaining about it doesn't undo all the people who think that the first thing happened and never see the retraction.
Nuance. The whole origin story of this podcast was coming to terms with the fact that the issues that we're talking about now, you can't discuss them on Twitter because there's no room for fucking nuance on that website. And this was the whole reason why I wanted to do this, was to bring in people like Free, yourself, that are on quite radically different ends of the political spectrum. You know, I'd say broadly, I'm pretty left-wing, Free's libertarian, Tucker, by your own admission, fairly centre. And the whole idea was, let's talk about all these issues, but not in an aggressive, we're hunting for the retweets, we're trying to cause conflict way. Let's just have a chat and prove that that's actually possible. Where the angle in media now is that you tune into things like the Sky News paper roundup and you just want to watch a fight. You just want to watch a big back and forth of people who don't agree with each other. And Twitter is just shit-stirring. There's no actual exploration, as you're saying there, about the nuance of what's happening. But that's why I want to bring it back to what you said about, was it access journalists?
Access journalism is that thing whereby the journalists end up chummy with the politicians that they're covering. And so they start to self-censor what they report because they don't want to piss off their sources and remove their access. And so all the political palace intrigue stuff, and that is what Queensberg does essentially. She reports on palace intrigue. That ends up really undermining good reporting on policy and what the government's actually doing, because actually all we're talking about is vaccine stuff, and it's fucking poisonous. Everybody just really wants to know whether or not she has actually shagged Boris or not.
Oh, God.
Ugh.
Oh, man.
You know I'm right.
Can you please stop?
Like, will you stop?
I'm not going to be like my dinner.
You see that photograph that gets memed endlessly of her and Boris sat on a park bench.
I want to talk about this park bench picture. This was a really weird thing to me. I remember tweeting about this at the time going, why are the BBC shooting this like this? Right, this isn't like an interview where it's like, here's a journalist and here's a politician sat down having an interview. Why are we shooting this kind of like voyeur, we're in the bush looking at them? What is the editorial decision-making process or a directing decision to do that? What are you trying to convey? It's like, well, here's Boris, he's a man of the people, just having a walk in the park, and oh, there's Laura, and now they're having a chat. These are decisions that you're making here to aesthetically show this in a particular way, and that's what I don't appreciate. It's like, that's a whole thing where you're manipulating the audience there. This should be framed as a straight interview in a studio between a journalist and a politician, and it's that crap that I hate from the BBC.
You've just said everything that I think about that, because that photograph is hilarious and always open to so many memes precisely because it's so inappropriate.
I don't understand where that's coming from. And this is tying back into how they presented Jeremy Corbyn, how they presented the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Rishi Sunak.
Yes, the presentation of him as Superman during the lockdown.
Super spreader, more like. Thanks for eat out to help out. Eat out to spread out.
None of us work in film and TV, but these are decisions. There's nothing you put on a broadcast that isn't deliberate. Nothing just happens by a mistake like that. And that's not conspiratorial, that's just a straightforward thing. Before Laura and Boris did that interview, somebody said, here's how we're going to do it. You sit on the bench, she'll come in, and you'll do the chat. I would love to understand why. Why is this being presented in this manner? And that's the bit with the BBC where I feel that as a public service broadcaster, one, you probably shouldn't be doing that, but if you are going to do it, there should be an explanation or logic for doing it. But to me, it just feels like manipulating the audience to get them to like Boris more.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like there's any necessity to do it that way. You look at someone like Emily Maitlis, right, who I'm sure has political opinions that I probably don't agree with, but Emily Maitlis is really good. And you don't catch Emily Maitlis fucking on park benches with Prince Andrew. You know, that Prince Andrew interview that Emily Maitlis did, again, meme-worthy, her face is just fucking magic. But that is how these things should be done. Properly filmed so that you can see his entire body and you can see all the body language of the fact that he's a lying shitbag. That's how interviews with people of power should be conducted, not chumminess. That's not appropriate. Boris Johnson is the fucking Prime Minister. He should be filmed and interviewed in a manner that respects but interrogates his status.
So we've highlighted here at the BBC this chummy access journalism stuff exists down south. What about up here? Is there any examples we can think of that? Or how, for example, Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP are presented versus, say, how Ruth Davidson might be presented by the media? Because Ruth just isn't very good. Ruth has lost by a massive margin every election she's fought against the SNP. She's crap, but you would never think that based on how she is presented in the media. Now, fair enough, possibly because Ruth has a journalist background, she's relatively good at presentation. But when you get to the nitty-gritty, I mean, there's no way this individual should be held up in the same light as Nicola Sturgeon, or indeed many other female politicians. I mean, I actually personally thought Kezia Dugdale had a lot more merit than Ruth Davidson ever had. But again, you would not know that based on how the press has handled things. So do you want to just touch on a wee bit about how Scotland fits into all this, Tucker?
So the same access journalism thing applied here, but not to the Tories, but it applied to the Labour Party, because the Labour Party was essentially the hegemony of the Scottish political scene. That only really changed with backlash against Labour and because of the Iraq war. And that led to this ascendancy of the SNP. But the political class took a long while to catch up with that because that chummy access thing was baked in for the Labour Party. So, you know, you've got the likes of Kirsty Walk going on holiday with the former Labour First Minister of Scotland. Well, that doesn't suggest to me that she's somebody that's going to have an unbiased view of an opposition party to the Labour Party. Similarly, you've got Sarah Smith, who is literally the child of an ex-Labour leader. It's not that somebody should be judged by what their father did, but it's difficult to believe that she has an unbiased view of the SNP, and it certainly seems to be the case that that leaks out from time to time. And it's certainly the case that there was a sense for a long time that somehow the SNP had stolen the Scottish electorate. You know, I mean, you would see, you know, Jackie Bird interviewing SNP politicians, and she was problematically venomous. I mean, it was appalling to watch, and you just think, that's not good enough. Gordon Brewer's not as bad, but he's not great, is he? And, you know, he's somebody that was at uni with Gordon Brown, I think. So you've got these very long ties and friendships that make it very, very difficult for them to actually see their own bias, I think.
That real spiteful reaction towards the SNP, which we're identifying here, is much more wrapped up in the Labour thing. You're therefore seeing people that may have been fairly left politically have now got really wrapped up in this British nationalist end of Twitter. and this really hard-end unionism, which has really come about by just the SNP getting elected and going, yeah, we quite like the European Union.
And there's a sort of refusal, isn't there, to acknowledge by some of these people that the SNP could possibly be doing anything good. It's just George Fuchs saying, yeah, they're doing this, that and the other, and they're doing it on purpose. The idea being they're only doing nice things because they want to suck you in so that they can get the independence. It's like, does it matter if they're doing the right things? Did it occur to you guys to do the right things? You know, you could have done these things, but you didn't, and now you're complaining that somebody is because you think their motivations are wrong.
We've talked about and have critiqued the SNP on this podcast, believe it or not. Things like named person, we did an episode on that way back in the day, and we all agreed, talking about named person, that it's not that anybody coming up with this was like, ha 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 ha, let's be evil and do 1984. And that is how it's presented by a lot of these Britnats journalist types, where they're zoning in on the fact that the motivator for any attempt at good, or just good in general, is motivated by some kind of evil force within the SNP. So we'll say, like, yeah, they fuck stuff up. I think education-wise, they haven't been as good as they could be. There has been problems, but I don't get the feeling that a lot of the SNP are motivated by nastiness, if you like, and that way of not having the objectivity as a journalist just to deal with the issue in isolation. Suddenly it's got to be framed as these people are equivalency to the Nazis. And I mean, I'm saying that not with a lot of exaggeration, because there are people that are on like the journalistic periphery or even inside it that are leaning into that kind of rhetoric that is just simply fucking bonkers. But I'm intrigued by this idea that it's almost as a reaction to having the access pulled away that they had within the Labour Party and the overhanging bitterness, and why now smearing the SNP. It's like blind smearing. It's not looking for discussions. It's not looking for, like, how could they have handled named person better? How would this... It's not looking for that. It's looking for, they're the fucking scum of the earth, fuck them. And that just isn't the case. And on this podcast and on Twitter and stuff, when Kezia Dugdale did something that was quite good, we gave her credit for it. We're not that blinded to the fact that occasionally folk on the other side do things that are okay. Whereas now you're getting the Stephen Daisleys of the world that are just so hardwired in to that British nationalist thing that you're like, this isn't journalism or even coherent opinions anymore. This is just you being insane. I think, a lot of it is the clickbait culture that we're now in. And I mean, this is a huge rabbit hole. We could end up going down some kind of wary of looking into it too much. But people now are looking for opinion validation. So what they want is to read something that they already agree with, or allows them to get riled up about something they don't really want to learn or have a nuanced discussion. And what these writers are very good at is exploiting that. I say good at it, I mean, it's pretty low tier shit they're playing with here. But I think that Kevin McKenna's talent, or lack thereof, is simply to pick controversial subject matter or deliver controversial opinions and put that out into the world.
I mean, I don't read Kevin McKenna. There's Marina Hyde, and then there's Kevin McKenna. I've got other things to be doing. I could be reading Marina Hyde. I've got no need to read Kevin McKenna. And so I'm aware that he exists. I'm aware that there's a sort of controversy about him being shite, but I'm quite unaware of his output, because on the odd occasion when I've bothered to read it, it hasn't even worth being annoyed about. It's just poor.
And a lot of this is to do with how the internet works. The internet is algorithmic based, and it's all about interaction. So on YouTube, for example, if you're watching us on YouTube right now, if you dislike this video, that's actually good for us. If you leave a comment saying this podcast is shite, that's actually really good for us. And this is the weird thing about how the internet works now. It's about clicking and about interacting. It's not necessarily about learning and supporting. And this is where a lot of these journalists were listing off here. That's really their bread and butter. It's to get you to come in and leave a comment saying, Kevin McKenna, you're talking shite. Because you came in, you clicked it, you read the sponsorships that were down the side of the page, and you left a comment. That's how these folks stay in business. And this is the whole problem with society in a nutshell, really.
Yeah, it's the monetized clicks thing. So one of the issues that you face is the sort of escalation required to get the same effect. So it's a bit like drugs or pornography. You get a dopamine hit the first time, and then the second time it's not as good, and so you're always chasing that high. And it's the same. You get some controversy, but when you say the same level of controversial thing a second time, well, you're the person that said a controversial thing the first time, so that's now not a shock. So now you have to call immigrants cockroaches. Before you know where you are suggesting that you machine gun children on the beach, and then you leave Twitter.
I was sat the other night thinking about what am I going to say on this podcast about journalism, and I was thinking exactly what you've just said there, that it's all wired into that dopamine hit. So what a lot of people are online for now, and sadly, unfortunately, existing for now, is just a dopamine hit of the big pat on the back to reassure you that you're right and you've got this, or you want to be shocked and appalled. There's no real drive about learning or improving yourself or nuance. We fire up Twitter and we want to scroll down it and we want to see something shocking or something profoundly great. What we don't want is middle of the road consistency of goodness or intelligence. So there's so many writers and journalists that are out there that are sadly of a lower profile that are steadily making sense and doing good journalism and writing things that you go, yeah, actually I hadn't really thought about it like that before. You know, this person knows what they're doing. But they never hit the tier, though, of the people that are just punting out the shock value. And this is to tie back to what Rupert Murdoch worked out about human nature, and this is why we kind of have to blame the humans in general for this, is that we love it. We really love it.
There are some wonderful journalists out there, and the really good ones are probably the ones that you don't necessarily notice. So I may have said this before, but one of my favourite TV news anchor people is Jackie Long on Channel 4 News. And you probably need to Google her to see what she looks like, and then you go, oh yeah, her. And you've never thought about her. And you know why you've never thought about her? Because she's fucking professional. And so whatever her personal opinions might be, they don't tend to be particularly obvious, and she is even-handed, and she interviews people from all sides of political spectrum and gives them all a reasonably hard time, but not to the point that you find yourself thinking, steady on, love, let them speak. She is a good journalist, and the result of that is that nobody notices.
This is a problem across the board, you know, even in entertainment media as well, where it's just, if there's enough whiz bang bang going on here, it doesn't really matter if there's no substance or meaning behind it. And that's why you see a lot of writers that aren't fundamentally good writers or fundamentally good storytellers picking controversial things to talk about in a very ham-fisted way, in an uneducated way, getting the notoriety and getting the clicks. And I think to come back to your journalist type, you've got your access journalism, you've got your dodgy columnists, but I hope there are still people out there, and they evidently are, that they believe in the concept of what journalism is. And good journalism is important for society, but it's just unfortunate now that the public, and it's hard to not blame them for this because they are so readily consuming all of this. And it's like McDonald's or anything else, or a fast food restaurant of some description.
Hit me up with that dopamine.
Is that man now becoming a fucking snob? I don't know, but what I'm looking for with everything in life is more something memorable, something that's going to make me feel something or have an impact on me. And it's now journalism, entertainment media, it's all become fast food. So it's that's what social media has done to journalism. It's turned it into fast food, where you're turning up to get your quick fire meal that you'll completely forget about it within 15 to 20 minutes, but it gave you that initial, I quite like this meal. Whereas if you'd rather have a full, decent, let's go out to a restaurant and having a decent meal that we'll remember 3 years from now. But the culture now, it's not wired into that because the scroll factor.
Doom scrolling.
Yeah, but we keep consuming it.
As we've established, people can get sucked into attaching themselves to things, as you've sort of seen with the QAnon thing in America. So if you have higher standards about what can be put out in the first place, then there's less nonsense for people to attach themselves to. It's beyond my wits to work out exactly how you navigate the treacherous waters between censorship and standards. You can perhaps just have standards yourself, and give your money to the people who uphold your standards and withhold your money from the people who don't uphold your standards. And you can encourage other people to do the same. And you can hope, therefore, to create a market for the things that you want.
And is this why the BBC is quite important to zone in on? Because that's not what happens there.
They don't have to worry about markets, do they?
Exactly. Sky don't piss me off because I can take my money out of that. I've got some level of control. Fuck Spectator magazine. I'm not paying for that. Whereas the BBC, it's like, well, you've got Andrew Neil, who's heavily involved in Spectator magazine, or at least has been, hosting a TV show there. But I can't take my money off of him for that. So how is this fair? This now feels like we're playing with a rigged deck that is inevitably going to end up in far-right Bollocksville. Because I don't think it takes very long for someone following Andrew Neil and thinking his takes are normal to end up then discovering Julia Hartley-Brewer, Darren Grimes, and then eventually down to LBC Radio, Nigel Farage, and possibly on to InfoWars and beyond. It annoys me that the BBC don't seem to be willing to take any account for that slippery slope that they are definitely setting up, consciously or unconsciously.
I mean, the BBC has been guilty for a long time of this both sides thing, whereby unequal ideas are given equal airtime. Putting a climate change denier on with a climate change scientist is not an appropriate thing to do because both sides of that are not the same.
You'd have a debate about newspapers between Owen Jones and Darren Grimes, and as a viewer you'd be questioning, do either of these people know what the fuck they're talking about? This new crop of young, inverted commas, journalists, where they've gone to university presumably to study journalism, they then become a fucking political researcher for a party at some point, and now suddenly they're on Sky News giving their opinion to the world, going, you haven't been anywhere. You've done fuck all. Like, journalism used to be made up of people that really had travelled the world and really had lived a life and had some level of experience. Where this new entry into it, where you can just write an opinion column having been nowhere and done nothing, and suddenly you're a thing, is very, very weird to me.
I think Owen Jones is actually 95. He's just one of those people that always looks boyish.
Yeah. Yeah, he's not that young.
He has looked 16 for the past 25 years. The thing is, he's one of these people who he can be right about things, but he's so irritating that you're inclined to disagree with him even when you agree with him just because he's so fucking annoying.
Darren Grimes, it's just like watching a puppy drive a car down a motorway. Just this completely inept fool that I think is very Alan Partridge-like in a lot of ways, where you can't help but look because of how outrageously stupid the whole situation is.
Darren Grimes is somebody that needs to be put through a de-radicalisation programme. He was part, obviously, of the second-tier pro-Brexit campaign, Leave.eu. So Christopher Wiley, the whistleblower from Cambridge Analytica, when he was working on the inside of that, worked alongside Darren Grimes and a couple of other people, one of whom ended up being the whistleblower about the fact that Leave EU was punting money to them so that it could spend more than its allocation via another registered organisation. And Christopher Wiley's just incredibly sad about what has happened to Darren Grimes. It's like he's been brainwashed and now he's got this little cult of personality thing going on for himself. But I mean, he was very, very young when all of that kicked off, and I actually think genuinely a grown-up should intervene.
You'd sort of want to rescue him from the whole nightmarish disaster.
He is a nasty little shit, though.
It's in a slightly Partridge sense that his ego and his desire for attention overrides any sense of moral decency. That bit where he had David Starkey on his podcast, and the way Starkey was just doing racist after racist, and in the same way that Partridge would just sit there and go, yeah, that's what Darren was doing.
It was so good that he brought this guy on who was his hero, and he ended up getting him sacked from all his university positions.
That is a complete Alan Partridge situation, you know, to have not only made it worse for yourself, but the person that's your hero, you fucked them over as well. Like, you couldn't write comedy that perfect.
The mark of somebody who is any cop is that you might not agree with them, but you might still want to read them. So PJ O'Rourke is a great example of somebody who has wildly different political opinions to me, but whose writing I find endlessly entertaining. PJ O'Rourke is somebody who is intelligent, witty, urbane. I disagree with him profoundly, but he's never boring, and he's thought about his opinions, and you might have reached different ones, but he has thought about his opinions before he's arrived at them. It's entirely the opposite end of the spectrum from the likes of a Toby Young or an Alison Pearson, who have never thought about any of their opinions before they arrived at them, who've probably never really thought about anything at all. I'm not absolutely convinced that Alison Pearson is capable of thought any more than the average goldfish is. She literally just seems to exist to say things that are contradicted by her own previous admissions on Twitter. Do you know anybody that's actually had COVID? And somebody tweets back to her, I thought you'd had COVID, or your family have all had COVID. And it's like, well, yeah, but apart from me and all my family, do you know anybody that's had COVID? What are you talking about, woman? What the fuck are you talking about? These are people that are just literally just in it for the attention seeking.
Once again, we've highlighted lots of problems and provided absolutely no solutions whatsoever.
That's a service we can be proud of.
You're just looking outside, looking into a situation you can't really do much about. What you said, Tucker, was probably right insofar as all you can do is pay for the things that you really like and promote good journalism and good journalists and stuff like that. Be conscious about the things that you consume. It takes work. It's quite hard to find the good stuff and stick with decent long-form journalism and stuff like that. It takes more effort than to just consume like short tweets and outrageous stuff. But it is worthwhile doing, and I try and think of it as like consumption, as if it's food. It's like food I'm putting inside me. The knowledge is like that, and if you put crap food into yourself, don't be surprised if you start to get ill. It's exactly the same with like journalism. If you're watching crap all day long, then you're turning your brain into soup, basically.
Knowledge is porridge, to to quote the thick of it. Yeah, absolutely. It's exactly the same. Garbage in, garbage out. If you eat nothing but fucking wrestlers' burgers, you can expect really to get bowel cancer at the age of 45, and you've nobody to blame but yourself. For all of these people, you've got Marina Hyde, you've got Susan Boniface, who's Fleet Street Fox, you've got Carol Cadwallader, you've got Peter Jukes, you've got Byline TV. Give these people your read. Give these people your shares. Give these people your money. Because every time you spend £1 well on something, you're denying oxygen to the shit. We've got to pay to support the things we like. Because these people are all trading off the clicks mentality, which is a sort of online advertising model. So we do need to be prepared to pay for some good content.
Apart from this, which is free.
Yeah. We do this as a public service, y'all.